Welcome to Target Market Insights, the multifamily and marketing podcast. Each week, John Kasman interviews multifamily and marketing experts to teach you how to find the best places to invest, attract investors, and grow your portfolio. You are listening to Target Market Insights with your host, John Kasman.
Hey, welcome to Target Market Insights. I'm your host, John Kasman, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. Now, if you're enjoying the podcast, listening to this show, do me a favor and leave us a 5-star rating and review. And if you haven't already, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Now, today we're going to be talking to an asset protection specialist attorney. Brian Bradley is an asset protection attorney for real estate investors, high-risk professionals, business owners, and high net worth families. They help people keep and protect what they already have. Now, they do an excellent job of really helping clients understand the types of protections they need when it comes to their assets. And we're going to talk to Brian all about how they do that and what kind of things we need to watch out for. Now, just so you know a little bit more about Brian, now he's been identified on the Lawyers of Distinction list, the Super Lawyers Rising Star list, the Top 100 Stake Litigators list, and much more. Let's welcome to the show, Brian T. Bradley.
Hey, thanks, John, for having me on and putting this podcast together. And, it's really a big topic we're going to break down, but it's necessary for anyone who's thinking about investing, wherever you fall on the sliding scale. And, I just hope the key concepts, on the roadmap that we lay out, clears up some of the confusion on this topic.
Yeah, think about it, right? We talk a lot about how to acquire assets, how to raise capital, how to do more deals. And we always talk about building and growing and, creating assets. And very seldomly do we talk about how to actually protect that nest egg and the assets that we've developed. And for many of our listeners and many of our investors, that's something that is a critical aspect, right? It's like part of the reason real estate is so alluring to many people is they want to diversify from the stock market. For our international investors, they want to maybe take money out of their home countries that maybe are a little more volatile and invest it in U.S. real estate. So that makes a lot of sense, but just doing that without a real asset protection plan may still leave people exposed. Kind of explain a little bit more about kind of that philosophy and some of the risk and exposures that we leave ourselves up to when we don't have the proper asset protection plan in place.
Yeah, I think that is, it's human nature to put off things that are negative, first of all. It's just like, I'll get to my will later on. And next thing you know, you're 65 years old and you thought about this when you were 30 with kids. And it's the same thing with investing. You're more focused on building, but I'll get to the protection. I haven't been sued yet. Nothing's going to happen. Or, lady luck's on my side. I need that. I need this. I need. But you don't ever think about, the pieces of the pie that you don't know or you don't think about that can come and bite you in the butt and wipe out everything that you had. And, the negative side of real estate is that it's the most litigated area of law that there is. And then as you're investing, if you're, for example, a high-risk professional like a doctor, you have a lot of risk already just in your profession. And then if you own the practice that you have, you also then have business risk, not just malpractice risk. Then you're investing in real estate. Now you have risks from your investments that you have. And so the more and more that you grow, the more that you have, the more visibility that you have. And then you just need to realize, I have to protect this. I've worked so hard my entire life to build what I have. I want something to retire off of, and I want to retire in my lifestyle, and I want my kids and my grandkids to be potentially set up if you're really successful at investing. And that's really what we're doing is when a client comes in and says, hey, I want, you to protect my assets. They're just talking about, can you give us peace of mind, and preserve some of our lifestyle in case something happens. It's just preventative planning. And that's what we do. And, what my firm specifically does is we work with these higher net worth clients, that kind of turn that 1 million net worth mark. And what we're going to be talking about later on is higher level asset protection needs. Kind of what do you do when you outgrow that entry level LLC? And, they'll come with a higher starting point, generally around $25,000 to $30,000. But at that point, your profile is drastically changed. You have a lot more, you're more visible, you have more moving parts. So you just need more protection.
Now, those great points there, right? So understanding the protection, I love what you said about it's really about peace of mind. So as you're building and scaling and acquiring assets, really what we're trying to get is peace of mind that we're going to be protected in case something bad happens down the road. And
Exactly.
because
Like,
real estate is so heavily litigated, it is something that you certainly want to be proactive with as opposed to just putting it off.
yeah, and it goes to the adage, you don't get in car insurance because you expect to go and hit somebody with your car. You get car insurance just in case. So why would you not do the same thing with all the massive amount of money you're spending on real estate investments and other assets that you're acquiring to protect it for that rainy day if something were to happen?
So, Brian, I want to talk about two things. One, I want to talk about who needs asset protection. And then two, I want to talk about some of the best strategies for asset protection. So you've talked about primarily your firm works with people who have turned kind of that $1 million net worth number. Do you need to be at that number to start looking for asset protection, or who's the right person for that?
Absolutely not. The second you decide, hey, I want to invest in something, I want to own something, you need to think about how to protect it in case something were that negligent, accident were to happen, that building were to catch on fire, your renter were to have a party and someone were to get drunk, drive, T-bone somebody. Who owns that building? You do. Who's going to be named on the lawsuit? The presumed deep pockets, you. So there's stops on the road that we'll get in when you're investing. And so my practice, we primarily work with these higher accredited investors, but that doesn't mean that that's when you need to think about this. The ones that are going to be damaged the most are the ones that are starting out, because you guys are going to make a lot of errors at the end of the day. As you grow and as you start, you're going to learn through the hard knocks of life. And the entry point for that would just be get, the assets out of your personal name and start with an LLC. And I can break down the roadmap, whenever we want, but don't think this is just for the rich. It's not. It's everybody and anybody who's looking to invest and grow their life and start developing, retirement funds.
That's a great point there. It's not just for the rich. It's really for anyone who's trying to protect their assets. So let's start with maybe that person who does not have kind of the $1 million net worth right now, right? So someone starting out, clearly the strategies can be fairly straightforward. I know some people do like an umbrella insurance or an LLC, and some have, way more complexity to them based on, the layers or what they need to protect. Let's start with maybe that newer investor, right? That person who's acquiring their first piece of property or their first investment. What are some strategies that newer investor should be looking at to protect themselves?
Yeah, I would say there's no point in spending $30,000 on a Taj Mahal system when you're not ready yet. So you scale. That starts with, like you said, an LLC and get insurance. You're creating layers. The issue with insurance is anybody make a claim for their insurance company, and if you can get 100% coverage on that, call me, let me know, because that's amazing. Like, it just doesn't happen. It doesn't exist. And especially as claims get bigger and bigger. So, I would say your entry level, get insurance and get the property out of your personal name and put it into an LLC. But don't just have one LLC. You should probably have two, one to hold that asset in and then one to operate out of, because you want to separate ownership from use and enjoyment. And so you just want to create more layers that a person suing you is going to have to pierce through or try to get access to that asset.
Brian, explain that strategy more with the two LLCs. You said one to own the asset and one to operate out of. Explain that more.
Yeah, so you want to, it just comes down to use and ownership. You generally sue the owner. You want the assets out of your personal name. I don't want John on title. I want, either my trust, 123 Trust Street, or my LLC, whatever the name of that would be, not your own name, to actually just hold the property in it. And then you don't want to operate out of the same LLC that you own it in, because then that asset is then liable, could be connected to a lawsuit. So you want all the contracting and operations and agreements and vendors to be working out of another company with a different name that's doing all the contracting. They're the face of the company they're the face of it. You do all your business out of that operating company. And so you're just trying to split up liability in use and enjoyment.
No, it makes a lot of sense there. So having two LLCs, because that way you insulate yourself from anything that happens. So to your point, let's talk about maybe a slip and fall, right?
Yeah.
Someone slips and falls on the property. They go to sue the owner, but how does the strategy you're saying, protect the owner if they have those two LLCs set up?
So one, just you need to understand that LLCs, they're what we call maybe protection. So everybody needs to understand before you get into like the bigger guns of asset protection, anything that's a business entity in the US is just going to be classified as maybe protection. Maybe it'll work, maybe not. They can be pierced. Hence the word limited in the very first word of limited liability company. So you need to understand, there's no silver bullet. How it works is when someone sues you, law firms are businesses. And so a lawyer is going to look at how much money do I have to spend to then get a damage award? And then how much do I think that damage award is going to be? And where's the profit margin line fall on that? And so what you're doing is trying to cut out legs of damages when you're using LLCs and have multiple, like you used to use the word insulation layers, that they have to try to argue through because they have to file more motions, spend more money, have more legal, fees to come after the amount of money. And so that's really what you're doing is with LLCs and multiple LLCs is attacking potential damages and the profit line.
Got it. It makes a lot of sense there. Thank you for clarifying that. So we've talked about LLCs and you mentioned insurance. I know I use the term umbrella insurance, but is there a specific type of insurance that someone should be looking for to help protect themselves in this instance?
No, I would say no, because the same problem with any type of insurance is always going to be the same. Just insurance business themselves, their job is to collect premiums and not pay out. And then if you have something major that they're good at paying small claims, but if they have a big claim, their legal team is going to create legal separation from you and say, most lawsuits, you're going to get sued for intentional acts at the end of the day. And even in a statement and email that you send before you even were sued is going to be presented as discovery in a lawsuit. And so what's going to happen is that judge is going to say, hey, you sent this email. This email is a statement. Statements are intentional acts. And so now this accident is going to be deemed intentional. Now, what do you think your insurance provider is going to say? We don't cover you for fraud or intentional acts or malfeasance. If you think we're wrong, go ahead and sue us, but we're not covering you for that intentional act now, even if it may not be later on. Good luck. And so now you have to sue your insurance provider while you're being sued. And now you're just sitting there like, oh my God, I thought my insurance provider had my back. And the same thing goes with umbrella policies. It's the same arguments. You may be covered more and have higher levels of coverage, but the insurance defense arguments are still the same. And then you just need to understand, insurance law and how that works and insurance as a business. And then know your claim limits. At the end of the day, you may have a damage award above your claim limit. Then what? Where's that money going to come from? You.
Yeah, I mean, you hear really scary stories on insurance claims. We've had a guest, George Newberry, who was on our 100th episode, and he basically went through a situation where he had a multi-million-dollar claim. I think it was actually like $26 million he ended up losing going through a claim through, a hailstorm that took place. So, I think for anyone who's looking at just setting up an insurance policy and thinking that they're covered, you may want to dig deeper or kind of explore more ways to make sure you're covered and protected. So let's kind of move on. So we've talked about the LLCs and insurance. What's kind of the next phase of asset protection?
Yeah, the next phase would be setting up a mid layer. So if we talk about, like if you're from the cold weather, you go out in the snow, we're building layers. You got a base layer, that's your LLC and your insurance. And then you're going into a mid layer, which is going to be an asset management company that owns all of this stuff. But why that's important is I want to break down this distinction between legal versus practical authority. And then you'll understand why this is important to add then the final outer coat layer. Legal authority and practical authority is really important for real estate investors. Excuse me. The reality is that a judge can do whatever a judge wants. LLCs and LPs and all these, legal business entities are governed by the state statutes that you create them in. We hope that it always stays like that when you get sued in a lawsuit. For example, you live in California and you create a Nevada LLC, and the exclusive remedy for there would be just a charging order. You would hope that the judge would adhere to that, but in theory, that's not how things work out in actual litigation. And everybody knows that theory and practicality, really never mix. And so that's where practical authority comes in. It's the power of the judge to actually make decisions and do what a judge decides. And judges have really broad powers to reaching your assets in your real estate, like seizing them, placing a lien on them, foreclosing on them, ordering sheriff sales, clearing title so they can force it to sell, wage garnishments. And the problem is judges do this all the time with no legal authority. This is their practical authority. And so the solution here is to try to hinder that judge's practical authority when you're staring down down the barrel of that gun. And so the way we do this is with the next level of higher asset protection. And so, the mid layer is an asset management limited partnership. It consolidates your tax reportings to just one return. And it's important because as you start growing and having more assets, you're going to start creating more LLCs. You put couple of properties in one LLC, and then to spread out the equity risk, create another LLC. That way, if something were to happen and one property goes boom, it doesn't bleed into the equity of all the other ones. So next thing you know, you have 4 LLCs. I've had clients with 15 LLCs, and they're like, oh my God, this is just a financial mess, a tax mess. I need consolidation. And so what you do is you start putting those ownership shares that own your real estate into an asset management limited partnership. And what it does is it's a disregarded tax, entity. It eliminates the individual tax return for each LLC because now you're just filing one tax return on that main mother company AMLP. And this is because of the single member LLC is owned by that multi-member holding company, which we'll break down later on. It just makes more sense if I do that part of it later on. But that's the mid layer, is starting to consolidate all of your LLCs and all your other assets into one easy to manage management company.
And I think for anyone who is listening to this and is investing in multiple deals, especially those multifamily investors, whether you're in multiple syndications or you just have, 5 separate LLCs for 5 separate properties, this sounds like a great strategy to start to streamline the downside of creating all these LLCs, right? It's one thing to keep them all separate, so you limit the exposure of something that happens at that one property or within that one asset. The downside, and I got a friend of mine who, he hates this time of year because he's doing his taxes and, he's trying to file taxes on like 15 different properties. And these are large scale multifamilies. There's got K1 distributions and all sorts of different, logistics to it. And it becomes a nightmare, quite frankly, for him to do it. So it sounds like this may be kind of a pathway to streamline at least some of the back end paperwork while still providing some protections.
It does, because all those K1s flow through that AMLP, and then I think you're just generally, IRS form 1065. You're just filing that, and then the K1s are just through the AMLP. So you're just doing one simple tax filing at that point, and so that's how it works to start consolidating it, and then you start growing. And you're like, all right, I have all these properties. I have an asset management limited partnership. I turned that $1 million mark. I need something to just say, go pound sand. Even if you get a judgment on me, what do I do? I don't care. Go pound sand. Let's make a deal. 1 penny on the dollar. That's where you want to be at. And that's our final layer. And that's where we're using asset protection trusts and then picking the strongest jurisdictions that exist. And so what a jurisdiction means is that the laws and rules that govern you and trusts and business entities are going to be different from one jurisdiction to another, which is one state to another, even one county to another, one country to another. I just go think of what are like Perry Mason movies where like a body falls on the ground and it's between 2 county lines and you got, 2 county cops like, this our jurisdiction. No, it's my jurisdiction. It's that kind of an argument. And there's power behind that actually. And so, you can set up trust you have 2 options when you set up asset protection trust. You can do them domestically in the US, or you can create them offshore in the Cook Islands, for example. And I'm going to break down both. I prefer the power of going offshore if and when it's ever needed. It's not for everybody, but once you start becoming a high net worth and high visible client, it's something that you should really consider. And the reason is because it makes lawsuits go away very fast. They're really streamlined tax-wise, and you can generally resolve lawsuits for pennies on the dollar, even against super creditors like the IRS and SEC, just because of the strength. And the strength of these foreign asset protection trusts in the Cook Islands is they have what's called statutory non-recognition. And that's just a fancy word, word for saying go pound sand. We don't care. And so the way this works is that the person suing you would have to start their case all over from scratch, suing you in the Cook Islands, and they'd have to prove their case with the murder standard beyond a reasonable doubt. The plaintiff would have to front all the court costs and fly in a judge from New Zealand, and they can't take their U.S. attorneys with them. And if they lose, they pay. And if you're trying to prove a case, beyond a reasonable doubt, you're probably going to most likely lose. And the statute of limitations is only 1 year there. So when they realize, shoot, I had to sue this person in the Cook Islands, it's most likely already ran. But like LLCs and all these other things, there's pros and cons. If someone never tells you the cons, just walk out their door. If you're purely foreign, meaning offshore, it's going to be effective. 5 out of 5 stars, statutory non-recognition. But there's 3 other factors that you need to consider, which are control, cost, and compliance. And it's going to fall a little short. You're going to have to be out of control, meaning purely domestic, and subject to a foreign trustee. The costs are going to be higher to maintain. You're going to be looking at $5,000 to $10,000. And then the compliance, you're going to have to file a lot of IRS disclosures. So it's just more tax filings that your CPA is going to have to make.
And what was the cost for that again?
So the cost for a foreign asset protection trust, on average is going to be around $30,000. And then the maintenance fee on that is going to be generally just purely foreign, $5,000 to $10,000 is about the
annually.
average. Yeah, annually.
Yep.
And then you have domestic asset protection trusts. The U.S. followed suit 10 years later after the Cook Islands, and we started getting on board with these. The downfall of these domestic asset protection trusts is there's only so many states that have them, 17 states. And what we're starting to see is courts ruling that, hey, you're a California resident using a Nevada asset protection trust, but guess what? You're not a Nevada resident. Those laws were only created for Nevada residents. We don't care about the choice of law. And you're starting to see cases come down with these rulings, nationwide. We got In re Hubbard, Dale versus Dale, Tony 1 versus Wacker. These are all good domestic asset protection law cases. But the courts just said, hey, we don't care. We're not exercising those choice of law jurisdictions because you don't live there. And there was one where it was an Alaska resident using an Alaska asset protection trust, and they just didn't care. And it's because we have the U.S. Constitution. And in the U.S. Constitution, we have the full faith and credit clause, which is good. And it means you have to honor other state court orders. And so you have no, hey, go pound sand option here. And so now that you see kind of the landscape of everything, we got LLCs, we got, legal, different types of authority here. We got domestic asset protection trusts. We got foreign asset protection trusts. What do I do? Which do I pick? I would say when you get to that higher net worth level, you can actually combine a domestic asset protection trust with a Cook Island foreign asset protection trust called a bridge trust. And it was created 30 years ago. And what you're doing is essentially just combining the best of both worlds. We call it a bridge trust just because what you're doing is connecting 2 countries together with a bridge. It's just an easier concept to understand. And then you cross the bridge to the safety of the Cook Islands if and when you ever need it when you're under attack. And then when the attack is over and the case settles, the assets move back to the U.S. And for, the CPAs or lawyer listeners that like to really geek out on this, or I get, a lot of investors just want to know, give me some more details of how this works. The bridge trust is an irrevocable tax neutral grantor trust. That's the big fancy word for it. Why you want the trust to be irrevocable is that if you're ever challenged in front of a judge, and that judge says, hey, I see that you own assets, we think you control those assets. And so we want you to bring those assets back so that they can be collected on. If it's irrevocable, you don't have the power at that point to do it. And so you can't be held in contempt of court until you do. And what a grantor trust means is that you created the trust and then you, the creator of it, retain some of the powers over that trust. And then like all asset protection trusts, they're self-settled spendthrift trusts. And what this means is created by you for you as your own beneficiary. And so the win-win of doing all of this is that your IRS reporting disclosures for the bridge trust are going to be very simple because it's domestic. So you don't have all those IRS foreign compliances disclosures that you have to make. And you don't have to, you're not going to have as much annual maintenance fees. It's going to be $2,100 versus $5,100 because it's classified domestic, even though you get the foreign power. And that's because of a specific code, USC section 7701, that you have to maintain compliance with, called the court test and the control test. Excuse me. And so how all this works is that the first layer is your base layer, your LLC. And that holds your real estate and other assets that can hurt somebody. It has a key. It can go boom. You put those into LLCs. The next layer is your asset management limited partnership, which acts as your holding company. And it holds the bulk of your assets like cash, stocks, bonds, your shares in syndications. That's where you're going to be holding those. Whatever essentially can't hurt somebody can just go straight into the AMLP without the LLC. The LLC is going to be held inside the AMLP. And we use these asset management limited partners because they have a separation between a managing partnership share called the general partner and a minority partnership share that doesn't. That's going to be the ownership share. And so you, the client, will be the general partner of the AMLP, and this is going to give you control to use your assets and all that, enjoy them. The AMLP is just going to be the holding company of everything. The final layer is the outer layer, which is the Asset Protection Bridge Trust. And it's going to be the minority limited partnership of the AMLP. And that's the controlling interest of it. That's the ownership interest. So your bridge trust is actually going to own the AMLP and everything inside of it. And that separates the ownership from use and enjoyment. And then you either die and your assets get distributed per your living will, or there's a crisis, the bridge trust is triggered, and the assets cross the bridge to the power and sanctuary of the Cook Islands, and then the case gets settled for pennies on the dollar, and that's your go pound sand option.
So that's a lot of information to take in, right? But phenomenal information for anyone who's looking to really protect themselves and protect their assets. You talked about the LLCs, then the asset management LLC, right? Or you said AMLP, I believe.
Yeah, it's a limited partnership. Yeah, it's a limited partnership, but when you create them for asset protection, they're called asset management limited partnerships.
Asset management limited partnerships, and then kind of creating these trusts or the bridge trust. We really didn't talk specifically about trust. So for someone who has heard the term trust, has a general sense of what it's supposed to be, but really don't know what a trust is, can you just explain exactly what a trust is and how it works?
Yeah, like layman's terms, a trust is an entity that exists on its own that takes the assets out of your personal name and you put them into a trust for a beneficiary. Like a revocable living trust has no protection to it, but it passes on and tells who, when I die, my assets go to. An asset protection trust is a trust that I put my assets in. I take it out of my name. My trust owns it for an identified beneficiary. Asset protection trust, you're the beneficiary also. I created it. I'm also the beneficiary of it. And so that's what an asset management, an asset protection trust is. But you still have control over your trust. It's just what you want is to take assets out of your name.
So I think one of the misnomers is that trusts are really just for rich people, right? Trusts are just for the people who are trying to hide assets or things of that nature. Talk to me about your perspective on trust and who should be using trust.
Anybody. Trusts have been in existence since the Crusades, because people would go out and fight wars and they would have to put their money or houses or something into something in case they died at war. And then per the directives of, that trust, then whoever was, the trustee would then distribute it. Trust and asset protection is not about hiding anything. It's not about tax avoidance. It's all tax neutral. If you were to come in to be like, hey, I don't want to pay my taxes and I want to hide assets, I would say, go find somebody else because that's fraud. I'm not doing it. And that's when you get, when you see people get in trouble, it's because they did something like tax avoidance, criminal activity, or hiding assets. That's when you get in trouble. If you're doing everything on the up and up and you're not trying to not pay your taxes, you can get tax advantages. Don't get me wrong. Like there's secondary tax benefits. It's just the purpose can't be to hide assets to not pay taxes, But Not everybody who's just rich uses trust. There's revocable living trust where if you own a home, you should have a revocable living trust. It just helps with probate and taxes. The issue is that's not going to protect you in a lawsuit. That's not what they're created for. And so that's a big misconception is like, well, I have a trust. I have a revocable living trust. I'm good. Like, no, you're not, because your revocable living trust has no teeth to protect you. It's will get cut through by a judge very, very fast. What you need is to create the asset protection part of it to it.
So the revocable living trust really is more just to communicate who gets your assets, or who gets the assets. The irrevocable trust, that really has more teeth. That will create some protection in case you are sued or in case someone comes. So that's really important to know that there are two different types of trust. And just because you have a trust, it may not be the trust that's going to provide the sort of legal protection that you're looking for. You mentioned probate. Yeah. When you talked about the benefit of revocable trust, I think that's another big benefit that people don't really think about very often is that, yes, we want to create these assets and yes, we want to pass them on to our family, friends, heirs. But if we don't have a trust set up, then it still has to go through the probate system, which means that it becomes public records and that anyone searching, whether it be, other investors who want to see if they can go out and buy this property from your son or your kid who inherited this property, or other creditors or other people in general who can now go after and understand who these people are who have taken on these assets. The trust allows you to not have to disclose this in the public forum. So I think that's something that if you really think about who they are or what happens to you, especially if your kids are young or your heirs are young and they have to be held by someone else until they become of age, that may not be something you want to expose them to, having a lot of different people knowing what's going on and what they got. So even if you're not looking at the legal protection side of things, you may want to think about whatever assets you have, putting them into kind of that revocable living trust, simply just to avoid probate in the court system, tying up, where your assets go once you pass along.
Yeah, and creating your medical directives in there, and it goes beyond just identifying the assets. It's also just you may not want the state to decide who gets what, and if you don't have a revocable living trust or a will saying, "Hey, this person gets this, that person gets that," your kids are going to fight over it. Your grandkids are going to fight over it. The claws come out. Everybody hates each other at that point because everybody wants something, and then the courts are going to decide. And I've had a client whose grandparents died, and they had probably in the 80s a $50 million estate and owned prime real estate in Lake Tahoe, Lakeshore, property. And they just passed without even a living will or anything. And then the siblings started squabbling over it. And basically, I think there's not even $1 million left on that estate after all the lawsuits and everything went down. And, and just because they figured, oh, my kids get along, everything will be hunky dory and just fine. And that's just not how things play out.
Yeah, I mean, that's an important point to communicate. It's interesting. We just had a woman named Jamisa on, and she talked about that. It was a little less than the trust, but her grandmother had left her a house, and her own father, was really upset that he didn't get the house. And between that and other uncles and cousins and whatnot, kind of fighting her over it became kind of an issue. So, we don't necessarily think about the strife that it can cause internally for the family when you're creating these assets, but just clearly identifying, who gets what and what your directives are. It's something that's important. And we don't know, when that time's going to come for us. But as we are thinking about our assets, not just asset protection, but then also, being clear on where those assets go and how to protect the family and set them up for the future is another key component of building this thing up. So what kind of questions do you typically get? I'm thinking about our conversation, and there's so much rich information that I know there may be a lot of follow-ups, and I advise and implore any of our listeners who have questions, either reach out to Brian, or if you want to search and kind of find more information on your own, please do that. But what are some of the common questions or common misnomers that you get when it comes to asset protection?
Yeah, the biggest one, it's always the elephant in the room, especially if people don't hear, from a podcast or something like that, is like, what's the cost? Like, I want the Taj Mahal, but they don't want to, at the end of the day, we're just waiting to find out how much it's going to cost to build the Taj Mahal. And so I'm like, if you want, like LLC, AMLP, bridge trust, that's, $30,000. So it's always just, no, the higher level you need for protection, it's going to cost more. But then, if you're trying to protect $2.5 million, and you can do that for upfront cost of 30 grand, and like, hey, go pound sand, I think that there's the benefit there. And it's scalable. As always, I get people who are like, I was just afraid to call because, I don't need the bridge trust. I'm like, I know, but you're starting out. So understand, scale up, everything's scalable. If your plan is to grow and create $1 million plus net worth, where you start with that LLC isn't going to be where you end. So you got to go LLC, then a management company, and then, you can scale this up. So don't be afraid of calling larger firms or firms that, deal with higher net worth clients, because as long as you're investing and growing, we love working with you. We don't want to see your money get taken from you or your properties. A lot of the misconceptions, which is a great question, and we tapped upon a couple of them. Asset protection is illegal. No, it's not. Like we talked about before, insurance is a form of asset protection. Business entities, LLCs, LPs are a form of asset protection. Trusts are a form of asset protection. It's just a combination of them all. I teach asset protection for the Oregon State Bar and write, legal journals for them. The American Bar Association has a specific subsection tailored towards asset protection. So it is legal. Judges come out and say, we like asset protection if you do it when you're not being sued. Just do this stuff beforehand. If you come in after you're being sued, like, hey, I'm being sued and this guy has $1 million claim on me, I want to protect my assets now. No, I'm sorry. That's not going to work. You got to set this up when you're not being under attack. Offshore trust are scams, because people watch a lot of movies or they read about, criminals that do dumb things and trying to hide assets. And I would just say, like, no, they're not, but scams do exist. So just, be cautious of that. And people get concerned when they, hear about the Panama Papers and watch movies. So just do your due diligence, like on anything, but realize offshore trusts have been the global standard for asset protection since they came out in the 80s. It's the only thing that's withstood court attack for over 40 years. LLCs constantly are being pierced. So, once you get into that higher net worth, level, start looking towards the gold standard. You're going to need it potentially. A really good question that I got from this mastermind group was, does crossing the bridge with the bridge trust from the U.S. to the Cook Islands create a fraudulent transfer? No, it doesn't, because a conveyance happens when you change ownership of assets. And so at that point, when we create the bridge trust, we create it within 30 days. All the assets are automatically transferred into the bridge trust. There's no more conveyance when we slide the scale domestically from, the U.S. to the Cook Islands. The transfers were already done within 30 days of creating the trust. And then another good, question when it comes to foreign trust, because it's so much, misconception about it. Can a foreign trustee take off with my money? And that's a really good question. And I would understand that concern. A properly drafted asset protection trust creates internal checks and balances. And so it involves, you, the trustee, the person, and then the person that created it. You got your trustee with a trust protector who's a third party looking over that. Generally, your law firm like me or another firm that you hire. You, the client, looking over the trust protector. And then you have a final check and balance, the actual bank that you would choose. And then they would have built-in delays and client consent requirements before anything can ever be transferred or any transfer can ever take place. And so the effect is that it's going to be virtually impossible to, make any move in your trust and with your assets without you ever directly knowing about it and signing off on it.
That's great information. I appreciate you breaking that down on how to protect yourself there and some of those common questions and common misperceptions that people have. And you talked about some of the offshore accounts, for anyone who's thinking about the Cayman Islands or Switzerland, they have a great reputation as being great offshore locations, but it doesn't sound like it's as simple as moving your assets to those countries and you're scot-free, huh?
Yeah, no, it's not. And because it's, the agreements that we have with the US and like Switzerland and all these other places, people are like, oh, I want a Cook Islands trust, but I don't want to spend $30,000. I can go spend 15 and get one in the Bahamas. The issue is when it gets challenged in court and your assets gets frozen in the Bahamas, you then go and create the Cook Islands one. So then you just spent $15,000 because you're penny wise, dollar stupid, to then go spend $30,000 when you realize, shoot, that didn't work. So, and you generally don't need to create the Swiss bank account and stuff like that until you actually have to transfer assets, to the Cook Islands. So that's one aspect of it that doesn't get put together until you actually would need it.
Cool. Well, we're definitely not going to spend more time talking about Swiss bank accounts and the complexities that can come in there.
Right.
But I think this has been very informational. If you want to learn more about some of the stuff we're talking about with Brian, by all means, reach out to Brian. And then you can certainly, do some of your own research as well. We'll put some links into the show notes. Brian, are you ready to go into our bullseye round?
Yeah.
How has a failure or an apparent failure set you up for later success?
So my whole life's been about not like failure, but I came out of law school at the wrong time. So I was an injured athlete. I played baseball in college, tore up my arm, thought I was going to be pro, had to become a lawyer. So I had to pivot. Went to a small school, economy tank, came out of law school in 2008, couldn't get a job anywhere. I was going to be a prosecutor. That didn't work out because there were no jobs for 4 years. So I got jerked around by a bunch of, family-run law firms, had to work for free for 3 years, literally free for 3 years, representing indigent clients in court just to get into court. And then made a massive name for myself, but then went, as a janitor lawyer, basically like come clean up my problems, and then fired me afterwards. Thanks, here's your check, goodbye. And so it's not so much like, failures, but just I constantly had to pivot. And so I took, life's lemons at me and just kept moving forward and not taking it and being complacent and moving forward.
All right. Well, that's good. Well, and how did that set you up going forward?
It just created a stronger mindset. It's like, I can't control life's events. I can't control the economy. I can't control somebody, not wanting to keep me on the firm because those type of cases aren't coming in. What it set me up was just saying, I'm not going to spin the wheel for somebody else to make somebody else money. I'm going to create my own firm. So I went out on my own and just said, I'm going to ride it, myself until I die. Trusted in myself, created myself. And then I just had to go through the hiccups of learning to be a business owner and not just a solo practitioner, which is a whole another probably podcast series on that.
All right. Give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
Right now I'm really getting into, like Google Analytics. And so I've been really focused, because for asset protection, I'm more face-to-face investors, and going to groups and seminars. So I had my website, but I didn't really care much about it. But for me as an investor, and I started thinking about it on a job, I have this website and all this content on it. What is it doing for me? So I called my website host guys and, they're like, it's not doing diddly squat for you. And I'm like, well, if I can get my website to generate, 4 leads a month, it's working for me. So it's like, everything has to work for you, just like in investments, so if I'm investing $1, my dollar needs to make $1 and that dollar then needs to make a friend. So my website can't just be sitting there passively not doing anything. So I just, I got to practice what I preach and let's get this thing working for itself.
What is a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals?
It's not a day. So the night before, when I go to sleep, I really reflect on the day and organize and structure my morning. And then when in the morning, I get up a little early and I read a little bit, and then I prioritize, for the next days, just so I can stay on track and stay organized. So it's really just reflection and organization.
What's one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you were starting out?
You can't control everything.
What advice would you give to a smart-driven college student about the real world?
Check your ego.
What are you curious about right now?
Everything. I have the most inquisitive mind there is. And so I read books about, Jesus and what was his real life like. And then I'll be reading stuff on, neuroscience or computer SDO operations. So like I am one, woodworking. I have one of those really inquisitive minds that my neighbors like, we hate you because you're like the Renaissance man. And
So we know that you're out in Oregon. What part of Oregon are you in?
So I'm just south of Portland. So I'm about 15 minutes south of Portland. And then we represent clients nationwide. That's a great thing about, asset protection is, I get to represent clients nation and worldwide.
Awesome. So for, you said 15, 20 minutes outside of Portland, give me the best place to grab a bite in your city.
In my city, I like, what's the word?
You can expand that to Portland if you want to. That's up to you.
No, because not many people know this place. It's industry. Really, really good food. Really good, mixology, drinks, like not just cocktails, mixology. Good wine. Obviously, they got good beer selection. It's more of a tapas style dinner to where you order a bunch of little plates for the table.
It's awesome. We'll definitely make sure you check that out. Industry sounds like a great place. Bryant, this has been a lot of great information. I mean, you talked about really asset protection from, the beginning to from an entry level strategy up through kind of the Rolls Royce strategy, as we've talked about, from creating LLCs to the AMLPs to the bridge fund. So lots of great information there. For our listeners who do want to learn more and maybe go to your website or find out more information, what is the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, they can email me, Brian, Brian, at btblegal.com, or just jump on my website, www.btblegal.com. And, I have tons of free content and videos and downloadable brochures on there because it's all about information. You got to educate yourself to be comfortable with what you're going to do. And I do free consultations. I used to charge for consultations, but I really got tired of people like, I just got afraid to call because I wanted to talk to 4 or 5 firms and I didn't want to pay a consultation for every single person, or I just thought you were going to be too expensive. I call, get the information. You think you can go find me cheaper? Good, go. Just take what I have to say, and then go talk to somebody else. And I think you'll benefit from the talk.
No, I love it, Brian. I love we call it the abundance mindset, right? Of just being out there and not worrying so much about giving that free consultation and, whether or not someone hires you immediately after that or not. I mean, ultimately, if you're helping people, I think they get a vibe of who they want to work with and where your mindset is. So I appreciate you coming on the show, even just, sharing so much. I mean, you did give a lot of great information on the things that we can be doing to protect ourselves. And I hope our listeners, and even for ourselves, I think we even have to take a look at, the way we're set up in a couple different avenues and take this information and take action on it. I think that's the key is, take it. You can't say you didn't hear it or you didn't know it now. So let's start taking action on it. Make the things. You may not be able to build that bridge loan product right now, but maybe you can look at your LLCs and start protecting yourselves that way. So, Brian, I really appreciate you coming on the show today. We'll definitely put a link in our show notes and allow our listeners to get in touch and follow up if they have more questions for you.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I had a blast.